There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Darrin Murriner, who is co-founder at Cloverleaf. Darrin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nikki. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's. I'm glad to be talking to you today. We're going to be talking about teams, y'all. And Darrin's going to dig into for us some ways that to build and maintain successful teams. But he's going to be talking about it from an angle of just, how to bear in mind that these are people we're talking about, because these things can get kind of X's and O's, But before we get into all of that, Darrin, I would love for you to just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Cloverleaf have been up to these days.
Sure, I would love to. So my background, I have over 15 years of corporate experience, worked at large Fortune 500 companies. I've also been a part of startups. So I've been a part of 4 startups as a part of the co-founding team. And the latest of which is Cloverleaf. In between exiting my corporate career and starting Cloverleaf, I also wrote a book called Corporate Bravery, which is focused on building cultures that are based not on fear, but on taking new ground. And that was a very successful book. And then really some of the lessons and some of the things I wrote about in there really kind of informed launching Cloverleaf. And what Cloverleaf is a technology platform that helps leaders and organizations build high-performing teams. And we do that kind of along 3 different dimensions. So the first is what we like to say, know yourself, know your team, and then improve performance. So self-awareness is a big part of that. And we use assessments, very common assessments that people have used every day. And then we organize people into teams. People can create new teams, invite other people into teams, and then we give you insights about how those people are likely to work together and how you can improve performance. And then the last piece of the product suite is integrations with tools like email and calendar and Slack. So these things that people are using all day, every day to get coaching insights on how to improve performance on a daily basis.
I love it. So we're basically talking about a way to proactively shape and refine your teams to ensure better outcomes, because of course that's what everybody's after. So to that end, Darrin, talk to us a little bit about some of the key factors that affect team success overall.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So I think where a lot of people start is with talent. And I think, unfortunately, especially in the HR technology space, people have a really high focus on talent. You'll hear job boards talk about, find that needle in the haystack. And, oftentimes we think about sports analogies and it's like, hey, let's go get LeBron James. And then we're suddenly going to make the playoffs, which obviously didn't work out very well for the Lakers this past year. And so talent can be a factor, but it's less about that. And it's more about the environment that you create for talent to thrive in. And oftentimes really comes down to 3 key factors that we find. So one is trust, creating an environment that allows people to really be themselves and contribute the best of who they are every day, whether it's, playing to their strengths and, putting them in roles and situations where they can be most successful. And then we think diversity is a huge part of that as well. And, oftentimes it's less about, gender or race and things that we think about with diversity. And it's more about how, our experiences and our backgrounds and our thinking styles and how those things come together to allow teams to really create, outcomes and products of really high levels of value and creativity. And then the third thing that we see often is communication. And really good teams communicate well. And there's a really nice relationship between trust and communication. So trust was that first factor that I talked about. Mm-hmm. Because if trust isn't there, then oftentimes what we see is communication is really poor as well. Because if you don't trust your manager, then you're not going to bring these things to your manager. If you don't trust your peers, then you're going to be afraid to speak up, because maybe they're going to do something behind the scenes to punish you for sharing that information. So really it comes down to those three things: trust, diversity, and communication.
I love it. I love that diversity is one of the primary factors that you list. And I love the way you talk about it. I love the way you talk about it, because what we're not talking about is placeholders or tokens or, difference for different sake. We're talking about how do we really get different perspectives in the same room. And now a lot of the time that you can get that through, looking at folks from different backgrounds, but that needs to be the goal. And I love that you talk about it that way. So once you execute on those factors and you've got the right people on the team, what are some of the ways that you can help teams improve communication so that they can be more effective?
Yeah. So when we look at studies, oftentimes what we see is only about 40% of your day is really productive time, right? So there's a lot of time wasters in there. Inefficient coordination, waiting for information, waiting on someone else to give you something that is critical for your work. Unwanted communication. So, it could be like spam sales emails or other things. And then oftentimes there's just barriers to collaboration that come into play as well. So when you think about that, only about 40% of the average workday is really productive. And what we see is for organizations and teams that have higher levels of performance, communication is, for workforces and for teams that are really engaged, communication is so much better, and it flows so much more nicely. And some of the factors in terms of that communication is, immediate supervisor. Are they keeping me informed about what's going on in the organization? Are they casting kind of vision and context about how the work that I'm doing fits into the broader context? Some of the other things are just the overall organization. How does communication flow from levels? And, inside of a small team, maybe that's less of a concern, but, teams still operate in this larger cultural context, right? So if there's 50-person organization or a 5,000-person organization, that context is different, but still how communication filters down to the day-to-day work is a really huge factor in terms of keeping the team at a high level of performance and keeping the individuals inside that team engaged.
You know what? I love how what you just talked about is still consistent with your LeBron James analogy, right? So if we're talking about starting with, getting the talent, right? But then still not having an understanding of why things didn't work out. Often it's missing this communication factor that you just laid out, right?
Absolutely. One of the other really great sports analogies I like is, the New England Patriots won the Super Bowl last year. And, I'm sure we're all kind of sick of the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. But the cool factor about that is 18 of the 53-man roster were undrafted free agents, right? I mean, these were people after 7 rounds in the NFL draft, 32 teams, passed them 7 times in that draft. And really what that says is they're creating an environment. The New England Patriots are creating an environment where, they can plug people in, and they've figured out some of these contextual or environmental factors that are key contributors to success. Now, it helps to have Tom Brady throwing you the football,
sure,
and running the plays on the field. But ultimately it's less about the talent and it's more about, hey, what are we doing with the people that are on the field? Are we coordinated? Are we all moving in the same direction? Do we know what our role is? And are we suited to play that role effectively on a daily basis?
It's story time again, and we're talking about search engine marketing. Today, I'm going to tell you about a challenge within Pelican Case's B2B division. Pelican needed a partner with deep B2B expertise that could get them a massive bump in leads from their pay-per-click campaigns without increasing spend. After vetting a handful of agencies, they decided to go with Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency located in Southern California. Directive took on this challenge by refining their targeting and building custom landing pages for their advertising efforts. Once implemented, they saw a 208% increase in conversion rate. Needless to say, Pelican Cases met their initiative. And I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Another way to support, once you've got those, you've got the right team and you've built sort of a culture of communication around that team, so that these other factors don't slip through the cracks. And by the way, I think that what's happening, particularly when you apply this to like a business or B2B environment, when folks miss this communication factor, I think it's because they're just going based on what they've traditionally done to win. And there is sort of a lack of systematizing effective communication. So you get a leader that either is a good communicator and knows how to build that culture, or that doesn't. And even the guy who is doing it oftentimes doesn't know he's doing it because it's just his or her natural way of doing things. And so I think that's something that the industry could stand to improve on, is systematizing some of these effective communication strategies that you're talking about. But beyond that, the tools matter. So talk about some of the tools and techniques that you've seen that can improve the team performance.
Yeah, I think oftentimes when we think about tools, we're thinking of like things like Slack or Trello, which, I think is often, when we think about team technology, that's kind of where we're at. I think I'm really speaking less about those kinds of tools because, there's a lot of different tools, and oftentimes introducing tools, all you do is you're adding layers of complexity, right? Oftentimes we don't need more ways to communicate. We need to just be more effective with the way we're communicating and the tools we're using. So really what I'm talking about is, what are some of the routines that we create throughout our day? So one of the things we do as a team at Cloverleaf is daily stand-ups. And we try to be efficient with that. So it's really more about, what are these rhythms that we kind of get into on a daily basis to allow free flow of communication and let people know what I'm working on, what blockers do I have, so that if there's dependencies, we know what those things are and we're not being inefficient in the work that we're doing. One of the other things that we do is every week we have a weekly retrospective lunch where we sit down and just talk about what things are working well, what things are not working well. And, oftentimes there's a couple of things that come out of that it's like, oh, hey, we've got a real problem and we want to try to address that kind of after the fact. So we really just try to create opportunities for that communication to happen. So, stand-ups and retrospectives are good examples, but some of that stuff starts with, selection processes and onboarding. How are we getting people efficient from day one? And then all the way through to what's our performance approach? How are we measuring performance and determining success? And is that clearly communicated to people either up front or on the back end? So a lot of tools and a lot of nuances to how we can be effective, at really all stages of team development. So whether you're just forming a team or, you've been a team for 5 years, these are things that we're constantly as a team asking ourselves, hey, is this still working? Is this approach or is this format? Are the scope of the conversations that we're having appropriate for the people that are in the conversation? So those are all things that you should think about to really increase not just, your communication, but overall team effectiveness as well.
Yeah, for sure. So like what it sounds like is in a way that we don't often think about it, you're engineering culture, right? So what a lot of folks will do, again, with the LeBron analogy, is they'll expect that, hey, if we get the right people here and we model good communication for them, it'll catch on. There'll be a good culture fit, right? And the culture will just happen because everybody is on the same page, or we believe that everybody's on the same page. But where a lot of folks, I think, do fall short is implementing these processes that facilitate the building of this culture in the way that you're talking about, in such an intentional way, to where it is a, team, internally, at least a team first, initiative that does not stop, like you said, at just, once we got you in the door and you can do the job and you seem like you're like us enough, we share enough values that this will work. It's like, no, we're going to, again, systematize this, like from the onboarding to the way that we communicate. I'm at the risk of sounding like a sales nerd. I love a good sales stand-up. It's like one of my favorite parts of the job. So it's just really cool to hear these actionable ways that folks can make a team work that are outside of, all the buzzy, fluffy stuff that we hear a lot of the time. So thank you so much for talking about that with us today, Darrin. So now that I have successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, I am interested in what you are putting in it. So tell us, Darrin, about what learning resource you've been engaging with recently that is informing your approach or has just got you excited these days.
One of the resources that I've really grown to love, and it's another podcast, and I hope I'm okay saying that on this podcast. Hopefully,
yes, we love podcasts too.
Promoting the competition. But it's how I built this with Guy Raz. It's an NPR podcast, and it's really startup founder stories. And being an entrepreneur and a co-founder, it's really just my weekly therapy. So I get to hear about really successful brands who have struggled, for 8 or 10 years. And I realize that I'm not alone in this world. So that's just a really great, it's empowering. I get to hear really great tips and insights on how people overcame some really difficult challenges. And then I think the other thing is I follow religiously the Harvard Business Review, just because it's always current research. It's always tons of really great validation and data points to support it. A lot of the stuff that we've learned and have implemented in practice have come from research from the Harvard Business Review. And I don't know that I've ever read anything bad that comes out of that organization.
Same. They're one of my must follows on LinkedIn. And so that I never have to miss a nice little tidbit out there. Well, listen, I know other folks like me have been, listening to the way that you talk about teams and been motivated and inspired and are going to want to follow along with you. How can folks keep up with you and connect with you, Darrin?
Yeah. So we're on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Cloverleaf ME. And you feel free to follow along there. We have a presence on LinkedIn. You can go to cloverleaf.me to see our website, explore a little bit more about what our product is and how we can help, build high-performing teams and improve existing, already very successful teams. And then I think one of the other ways, if anyone wants to email me directly, it's Darrin, DARRIN @cloverleaf.me.
Good stuff, man. We'll have to have you on the show again here in the future to talk about some more cool stuff when it comes to teams. Because you know what? I don't think it's ever going to be something that anyone's got, all figured out. But I'll tell you what, these things that you've left us with today are certainly a great start. Thanks so much,
Awesome.
Darrin.
Thanks for your time, Nikki.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.